So, what if the very system designed to bring us all together is actually maybe the thing that's pulling us apart? We're about to dig into a really provocative argument that says exactly that about America's schools. We're going to unpack its diagnosis of what it calls a failing system, and then look at its pretty controversial free market solution. Okay, so the source material kicks things off with this really stark then versus now picture. On the one hand, you've got the historical promise, right? Schools is this great melting pot, a pillar of the American dream. But on the other hand, it argues, is today's reality, a system in crisis, one that's creating friction instead of harmony. And this, of course, leads to the huge question that this whole text is trying to answer. How did we get from there to here? What went wrong? Now, the diagnosis in this text, well, it might not be what you're expecting. It doesn't point the finger at a lack of money. Nope. Instead, it argues there's a fundamental sickness in the very structure of the school system itself. And this quote is used to really get to the heart of the problem, the sickness of an overgoverned society. The core argument here is that schools are just suffering from way too much government control, and that control has shifted power away from parents and put it into the hands of professional educators and bureaucrats. This all leads to this really interesting kind of counterintuitive idea called bureaucratic displacement. So think about it like this. In a big government-run system, pouring more money in doesn't always lead to better results. Instead, the bureaucracy itself can kind of soak up those resources, on more administration, more rules, while the actual output, in this case education, actually gets worse. It's a pretty wild idea. More spending could actually mean lower quality. And here's the data the text uses to make its case. Just take a look at this chart. In only 6 years, the input, the cost for each student, jumped by almost 60%. So you'd think, hey, test scores should be going up too, right? But look what happened. The outputs, the actual test scores, went down. The text says this is bureaucratic displacement in action. More money goes in, but worse results come out. So the bottom line of the diagnosis is this. When parents, who are basically the customers of the school system, have no real choice, there's just no incentive for the system to get any better. It essentially becomes a monopoly that serves its own interests, not the interests of the students and their families. So if the problem is a monopoly that stifles choice, then the proposed solution is to blow it all open with some good old-fashioned competition. And if the core issue is that parents have lost control, well, the solution has to be about putting them back in the driver's seat. The question is, how do you do that? The big idea is a voucher system, and it's designed to be pretty simple. Let's just walk through it. First, the government gives parents a voucher. Just think of it like a scholarship for their kid. Step 2. Now, parents can take that voucher and choose any approved school they want, whether it's public or private. And finally, step 3, the school they pick redeems that voucher from the government to get its funding. It's that simple. The money follows the student, not the system. Now, the text makes a really powerful point that this isn't some new, untested, radical idea. It's actually based on the same principle as one of the most successful education programs in American history, the post-World War II GI Bill. We gave veterans the money and trusted them to pick the best college. So the proposal asks a simple question. Why can't we do the same for parents and their kids? Okay, but an idea like this is gonna have some serious critics, right? It's a huge change. So let's look at how the source material tackles some of the biggest objections head-on. First up, the big one. This is probably the most common objection you hear. Won't this just help rich families and make things like inequality and segregation even worse? But the text completely flips this argument on its head. It claims the current system is what hurts poor families the most by trapping them in failing schools based on their zip code. The argument is that vouchers would basically unlock that cage, giving these families a real choice for the very first time. The thinking is that this leads to more genuine integration, where families choose schools based on shared values, not just geography. All right, next up, the whole church and state thing. This is a huge constitutional question, right? What happens when parents want to use these government-funded vouchers to send their kids to a religious school? The response here all comes down to a really key distinction. The money goes to the parents. The parents then decide where it goes. The government isn't directly funding any religious institution. And again, the text points right back to the GI Bill. For decades, veterans have been using public funds to go to religious universities like Notre Dame or Boston College, and it all works on this very same principle. And finally, there's this fear. What about the wealthy? If parents can add their own money on top of the voucher, Won't that just create a two-tiered system where the rich get an even better education and the gap gets even wider? The argument here is that, yeah, maybe wealthy families can add on, but the biggest impact by far will be for lower income families. For them, the voucher is like a bridge. It allows them to make this huge leap from a potentially failing school to a much, much better one. And that single step, the text argues, would do more to close the quality gap than anything in the current system. This quote from a parent, Maurice Walton, really just boils it all down. It's not about complicated policies. It's about simple accountability. If a school isn't doing a good job for your kid, you should be able to take your child and the funding that comes with them to a school that will. So when you strip away all the arguments and all the data, this whole proposal really comes down to one big ultimate question about what we think education should even be. The central idea, the core thesis of this whole thing is this. What if we applied the same principles of consumer choice and competition that make our phones, our cars, and pretty much everything else in our lives better and cheaper? What if we applied those same forces to our schools? And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question from this explainer. Should education be run more like the post office, a government monopoly? Or should it be more like the restaurant industry, a diverse, competitive marketplace where we all get to choose what's best for us? The text we've been exploring makes a powerful case for the latter.